We are finally here on our last video of quality management, the part 2 of the 12 quality essentials. The seventh quality essential is documents and records. And the main goal of keeping on why we keep documents and records is for us to be able to find the information whenever it is needed. So documents and records are different. We have to differentiate them. Let's start with documents. Now, documents provide the written information. This written information may either be a policy, a process, or a procedure. So policies, processes, and procedures all differ from each other. So what are policies? A policy is a documented statement which is given to the whole organization and endorsed by the management. So these are rules given from the higher up. This actually tells you what to do so that you can go towards the quality system. Now, this serves as the framework for QMS. Okay, so that is for policy. What about processes? Processes are the steps involved in carrying out the quality policy. So we have our quality policy. Now we need the processes to give us the different steps that we should need so we can carry out the quality processes. So the process is a set of activities. They are interrelated activities or interacting activities with each other that would tell you how to make an input into an output. So examples of laboratory input would be the request. So these are lab requests and the samples given to the laboratory. So those are inputs. What about output? Outputs can be the results from testing or the data that we have gathered in the laboratory. So a process will tell you how an input, for example, a request, can be turned into a result, and that is your output. Okay, the process can generally be represented with a flowchart that would give a series of steps to indicate on how the events can occur from the request going to the result. Next would be the procedure. So a procedure is a specific activity of the process. So it's more specific. Okay, a procedure is more specific than the process. This is the one that tells you how to actually do it. Okay, so the laboratory is very familiar with this because this is the step-by-step instructions on how you can perform the activity, and we call these as the standard operating procedures. So that those are the different documents. Next would be records. So what are records? Records are the collected information that is produced by the laboratory. Okay, so characteristics of records is that they are permanent and they are not revised. They do not need to be updated. So for example, the result of this patient 1 fasting blood sugar is 100. It will be 100 until the end of time on that date. You cannot change it in the future. So they are permanent data. Examples of records in the laboratory would be the forms, the completed forms that we have used in the laboratory, also charts that we have used, sample logs that we have, patient records. What else? We also have quality control information and of course the patient results or the patient reports. These are all types of records. The eighth quality essential is occurrence management. So occurrence management deals with laboratory errors. Okay, so what does occurrence mean? Occurrence is any event with a negative impact. Negative impact to whom? It can be a negative impact to the organization or to the personnel itself, Also, it can be a negative impact or an error with the equipment, or it can also be the environment where everyone is. So that is occurrence. Now, the goal then of occurrence management is to be able to correct the errors that has been caused by the negative events. So there are examples of sources of how occurrences may occur. Some of the causes of error in the laboratory may be easily identified, and sometimes they are also readily corrected, which is good. But sometimes they need a deeper investigation and procedure to find out what happened, why was there an error, and how to correct these error. Okay, so some sources of occurrences would be, for example, an unclear responsibility. Maybe the staff just doesn't know his or her own responsibility. As we have mentioned earlier, this can be corrected in the organizational chart. If the org chart can clearly define and state what each and everyone's duties and responsibilities are, then they would know exactly what to do and what not to do. We can avoid pointing fingers on who should have done this or who should not have done this. Okay, so that is unclear responsibilities. Another source would be, for example, when the SOP is not followed. SOP again stands for Standard Operating Procedure. So when a procedure is not followed, it can be caused by a lot of different things. An example of that would be maybe the procedure is not written properly, or it's not understood. It's not written in a way for the laboratorians to understand so that they can follow it. It's also possible that the staff is not competent. As we have mentioned earlier, competency is important. Maybe the medical technologist is not knowledgeable of the procedure and does not know how to follow it. Or maybe he just doesn't have the right or the correct skills to be able to perform and to follow the standard operating procedures. Now, there's a lot of other sources of occurrences, and most of them happen during the pre and post examination. Now, these would be discussed further in quality assurance, which is the next video. But just to give a few examples of pre-examination error, maybe there is an error in collection. Okay, maybe you collected a specimen from the wrong patient. You were supposed to collect blood from patient A, but you collected from patient B. It's also possible that you did not collect the correct specimen. Maybe you should have collected an EDTA tube, but ended up collecting a red top tube, and that is an error in itself already. Another pre-examination error would be mislabeling. Okay, mislabeling of your samples. Maybe you wrote the wrong patient, or maybe you wrote the wrong test on the tubes that needs to be tested. Examples of post-examination would be, let's say, transcription error. Okay, maybe you did not write the correct numbers or did not write the correct patient name on the result form. It's also possible that it's because of illegible handwriting. So your handwriting is poor, and that can lead to error as well. What else? Maybe you gave the wrong result. Okay, a result was given to patient A, which should be for patient B, and so on and so forth. So again, these are just examples of the different sources of error, and we have to make sure, that's why we have to make sure that a good occurrence management is set in place in the laboratory so that we can detect these errors and know how to correct them. The ninth quality essential is assessment, and this can be divided into three, which are audit, external quality assurance, and norms and accreditation. Let's start with audits. The definition of audit is that it is a systematic and it is independent. It should be a documented process which looks for evidences, and you evaluate these evidences objectively so that you can determine if the criterias are fulfilled or are all met. Now, an audit can either be an external audit or an internal audit. An internal audit is usually done by whoever is inside the laboratory already. For example, one staff from one section will assess another section of the laboratory, and this will be able to give an idea, a quick idea and an easy idea of how the laboratory is performing, whether it is compliant with the policies of the organization. An external audit, on the other hand, is done by agencies that are from outside the laboratory. That's why it's called external. And usually, an external audit is made so that a laboratory can get accreditation, or maybe when the laboratory needs certification, or when there's a need for a license to operate. So those are two different audits. The next one is external quality assessment. Now, EQA, or external quality assessment, gives the laboratory a comparison. Okay, so this is also done by an external agency or facility that would check the laboratory's performance and compare it with another laboratory's performance to make sure that they are at par from the other laboratories. Now, in the Philippines, the EQA agency is called as NEQUAS, or National External Quality Assurance Scheme, and this comprises of different reference laboratories. So different sections from the laboratories will send samples to the reference labs, and they will check the laboratory's performance by comparing it with other laboratories. Now, different EQAs can be: 1, a proficiency testing; 2, a rechecking or a retesting; and it may also be an on-site evaluation. Next would be norms and accreditation. Well, norms are the ones that provide the guidelines. Another word for norms is standards, and examples of these organizations that give standards would be ISO and CLSI. Accreditation, on the other hand, would be able to determine the effectiveness of the quality management system in the laboratory. So if you are able to be accredited, then that means that the laboratory and its testing is reliable, accurate, because it includes an evaluation of competency. So if you are accredited, then that means you have all of these characteristics. When you are accredited, when the laboratory is accredited, then it is considered as a great accomplishment, because it's hard to be accredited. And if you are able to maintain this accreditation, then they say that it is an achievement, because it's harder to maintain the accreditation because of all the different requirements. Okay, that's it for assessment. The 10th quality essential is process improvement. W. Edwards Deming is one of the originators of this concept, which is continual improvement, and of course, this is the goal of quality management system. Deming has outlined 14 points for quality, which can all be used for the laboratory, but for the sake of this discussion, I will only highlight 2 of those points. So the first one is to create constancy of purpose for improvement. The message here is that there is a need to be constantly working toward making the process better. So there should be a constant move on making an improved process. Next would be improve constantly and forever. So this statement points out that that continual improvement will always be a goal. You should always reach for an improvement or for perfection. Although we know perfection might not be achieved or it might be impossible, but of course, we should always try to get as close to it as possible. The plan, do, check, act cycle of Deming shows how we can achieve continual improvement, or shows how process improvement can be done. And this has been discussed in the TQM video. Lean and Six Sigma are two new tools or ideas that are being used nowadays for quality improvement. So in a nutshell, process improvement is something that is never finished, but rather it is something that continues on and on and on and on. It goes on forever, and it requires the commitment of everybody, careful planning, structure, good leadership, active participation, and engagement of everyone so that the process improvement can be a success. The 11th quality essential is customer service. So who are considered as customers of the laboratory? The central figure in the client list is the physician, or otherwise known as the healthcare provider. Why are they considered as the central customer? Because the initial request for the service, the initial request for the lab service originates with the physician. And if the laboratory is inside the hospital, then anyone who also assists the physician will be considered as customers. And examples would be nurses, medical assistants, secretaries or clerks can also help. Okay, if the phlebotomists are not part of the laboratory, then all of them can also be part of the customers. Another important figure or important client for the lab is, of course, the patient. And together with the patient is the family. The family is also considered as a customer because sometimes they may play a vital or a very important role in patient management. Sometimes they help in the collection of the sample from the patient, or they are the ones that transport the sample to the laboratory, and so on and so forth. When a laboratory is working to meet a public health need, then a public health official may also be considered as a customer. And lastly, the community where the laboratory is located has expectations as well. So the community needs to be assured that the laboratory will not create any risk for the community, for the workers, for the visitors, and of course, for the general public. So the laboratory is responsible for the safety and security of everything. They are responsible for containing infectious materials. They are also responsible for dealing appropriately with waste management. So you just don't throw your waste outside the laboratory, like needles and infectious materials. They should be contained properly so the community is not exposed. Also, the laboratory should also follow all regulations for transport of dangerous goods. Okay, so these are just examples of the responsibilities of the laboratory for the community. Now, for the laboratory, or in order for the laboratory to understand whether the customers or the clients' needs are being met, then the laboratory will need to employ tools for gaining information. And an example of that tool is a customer survey. And last is the 12th quality essential, which is facilities and safety. And under facilities and safety, there's a lot of different elements. So let's just go through them briefly one by one. So laboratory safety program. So this is important in order to protect the lives of the employees and the patients, and of course to protect laboratory equipment and facilities, and to protect the environment. Everyone is responsible for their safety. Next is the laboratory design. Now, the laboratory design should also be efficient. All related services should be located in close proximity with each other. So, for example, for a sample collection, if this is your laboratory, if this is your reception area, then your sample collection should be somewhere near the reception area. It cannot be at the other end of the laboratory. So, those are some things that you can consider. Next would be the geographical or spatial organization. So the laboratory director and the laboratory safety officer must consider some special needs. For example, the needs for equipment. What do they need? Do they have special needs? Temperature, spacing, power supply of everything, and if there is an emergency power supply or emergency generator that can be used just in case the laboratory's primary power source is down. Also, disposal of liquids from equipment, or the disposal of liquid reagents or the byproducts or wastes from the laboratory. These should also be considered, and other location of activities. Like, where will you be washing tubes? Where will you be placing this, storing that, and so on and so forth. A good example would be the molecular biology section of the laboratory, where it needs to have at least 2 sections. For one, the first section is where the DNA extraction will occur, and then the second section is where the subsequent steps for DNA would be performed. So they should be prepared to have 2 sections like that for molecular biology. For the physical aspects of premises and room, example, would a room need a high ceiling for ensuring proper ventilation, or should the floor have easy to clean and easily disinfected? Okay, and should there be no edges between the walls and the floor, or maybe the location of the fire extinguishers and the eye washers? Next is the identification of risks. So these risks would be the different hazards, the physical hazards, sharps, chemicals, biological hazards. So everyone, the laboratory should be able to identify all these risks and state how these risks can be prevented and how they can help anyone who has encountered these risks. PPE, of course, personal protective equipment, everyone should be trained on how to properly use it. And not only that, they should be trained on how to habitually use the PPE while working inside the laboratory. And lastly, it's emergency management and first aid. So the laboratories need to have procedures in place so that the staff would know how to deal with accidents and emergencies. There should be a written procedure also for the first aid, which should be developed and made available to all of the staff. That ends our discussion about the 12 quality essentials, and that is quality management system. Thank you very much for watching.